how to make up for lost deferred comp when transitioning to the RIA model. That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 119. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I also have articles, white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, this is part rant, part solution discussion about if you are in the situation, and for those of you that are at a wirehouse firm or any other sort of usually W-2 broker-dealer type firm, there usually is a component that you have to deal with, and that is the deferred comp. Your firm is essentially taken from you and deferring into the future. And the question is, well, if you want to go into this RIA path, well, if you leave your firm, aren't you going to lose that deferred comp? And kind of how can you kind of manage that situation? So I want to talk about just a couple items on just deferred comp in general, and then some things to think about of how you can try to manage that, or at least be aware of going forward if you were to transition your practice again to the RIA model. So to start with a bit of a rant on deferred comp. So, and again, this won't apply to some of you. If you're at a firm, possibly, usually independent broker-dealer firms typically don't have deferred comp, but again, wirehouses, W-2 regional type broker-dealer firms typically do. So the thing I just drives me crazy when I see this is how, and again, this is a total rant here, but how executives at these firms, whether it's a branch manager or all the way up to the top or the head of the private client group or the head of the firm, and they attempt to describe deferred comp as if it's this wonderful thing between the firm and the advisor, and they speak of, oh, this is how we can determine or create alignment between us and our advisors, and this is an investment in our advisor's future. All this nonsense word salad garbage about how they attempt to spin deferred comp. The reality is deferred comp is compensation, income you as the advisor have worked to earn in a particular year, and they are arbitrarily, there's no requirement that they do this, they are choosing to do this, they're arbitrarily deferring some of that compensation into future years, often way down the line, multiple years later before you will receive the money. So the money that you have earned this year, you might not receive for possibly 5, 6, 7 years down the line. They are deferring it, and yet they are trying to spin this as if this is all in the name of alignment, or somehow rewarding our advisors for their tenure and their loyalty. No, you've earned it. They are deferring some of it into the future. We'll get why they are doing this in a second, but that is absolutely what's happening. So I would have a lot more respect for executives if they at least acknowledged what it is. At least say, yes, we are taking some of this money out. We are not paying it to you years later, and that's to try to keep you at the firm. And I'm going to talk about that more in a second. But at least say it. Like, we all know what it is. Don't come up with this crap excuses or word salad, corporate speak nonsense. And so, again, you can tell that really annoys me. And as an example, sometimes you hear them talking about, oh, this is how we reward loyalty and longevity and tenure at the firm. And so, yeah, when you reward someone, that's fair to maybe have a vest period on that, just like you might give some employee a stock award that usually has a vest period on it. Well, if that was the case, you wouldn't necessarily do it every single year. I could understand if it's, hey, on the 10-year anniversary advisor that you've been at our firm, and to truly reward your loyalty, we are going to give you this one-time additional, not I'm going to take it out of your income, additional bonus of X. And by the way, here's how that works if you would like to accept that bonus. it is tied up for a couple more years or it has a vest period on it. I can understand that. That is truly a reward. That is truly a bonus. But taking someone's income they're earning today and just arbitrarily holding it and not giving it to them for multiple years is not alignment at all. Let's executives, let's stop talking that way. Just say what it is. It's a retention play. And I get why you're doing it, but don't come up with this nonsense. And basically, again, the reason they're doing this is to create what I would call a never-ending treadmill that you can't get off if you are one of those advisors. So the whole purpose they are doing this deferred comp, right? And typically the way these plans work is in a given year, you earn income. They take part of that income and defer it. In a typical arrangement, it might be like in a cliff vest. And so let's say that's 5 years out, it's a cliff vest. So you've earned that income. Hey, we're going to defer it. You don't get that for 5 years from now. And by the way, then next year, we're going to take your income from next year. We're going to take part of that, and then we're going to put that for 5 years out from that. And all of a sudden, you have these never-ending hurdles that you, while some of those, as time goes by, will vest and you'll receive that money, but there'll always be those ones just out of reach. And the only way, typically with these plans, that you can fully get all of the deferred comp, which by the way is your income, the income you earned, is to stay at that firm until you retire and fully exit the business and usually sell your practice there at the firm. And so it's a retention play. I get it. That's why they're doing it. And they should just call it what it is. But the idea is, hey, we're going to create these never-ending hurdles, and so you can never leave without losing some of your money unless you stay here all the way to retirement and then typically sell your practice here at the firm. So it's absolute retention play. You can't get off of that. Now, the final thing I'll just rant on about this, because I realize this is not just a rant episode. This actually talks solutions. I think, and as I was coming up with my notes for the episode, I'm thinking I was going to call this criminal. Now, it's not criminal in the true sense of it, but in the spirit of it, I think it's criminal. It's an interesting concept that they can take money, like I talked about, that you've earned in a given year and deferred out. And by the way, during that period of deferment, whether it's 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, whatever it is, before you can even receive money you've already earned, they can change policies at the firm that you have no say in. Maybe they change, and this does happen, they change the payout that you will receive over, say, those 5 years. They change maybe the support level that you obtain over those years. Maybe they change the office to something you're not as happy about. In all of a sudden, these kind of potentially negative consequences you could have, and you just have to ride them out. They could basically do whatever they want. Now they are constrained because they don't want to lose all their advisors, so there is some kind of barrier mechanism there. But the reality is, to even get the income you've already earned, you have to play ball with whatever they want to do over those 5 years. And again, this is a rolling period. You have to play ball. They could lower your comp and the payout, and you still have to stick around just to get the money you've already earned because it's been deferred. So I think you can understand why I'm not a fan of deferred comp. I think it's unfair to the advisors, and at a minimum, firms just call what it is, explain, be honest with your advisors about it's a retention play. It is what it is. But let's be straightforward. Okay, so if you're in that boat, I'm sure you're frustrated by deferred comp as well. So the question is, okay, so what can you do about it if you want to move into the RIA model? What are your options to kind of manage it, deal with it, hopefully long-term be better off even if you got to lose it? So a couple of tips. The first one is you will lose it. It doesn't matter how unfair this arrangement is, everything I've just been ranting about. It is what it is. You've signed something buried somewhere in agreement or your annual attestation or something, and you are agreeing to this compensation plan, and that compensation plan involves this deferment of some of that compensation. For better or worse, you've agreed to it almost assuredly in writing. You can't just say that's not fair. You can't leave, lose it, and then say, well, it's not fair, I want it back. There are cases where advisors have sued over this. There's a couple live examples right now. Some attorneys try to take some interesting angles on it. They don't seem to be getting too much traction on it because, again, fair or not, firms have put this in place, have disclosed it, have had you sign off on it. So you will lose it. Basically, don't think you can leave and somehow you're going to be successful suing to get it back. I'm sure there's been some crazy esoteric scenarios that have happened where that has worked somehow for an advisor or a team. That's not the norm, so don't put that in your toolbox as something that is realistically available to you to recoup the money. If you leave, you will lose it. So, okay, so you're going to lose money. Well, that's painful. That's losing your income. For some of you, that could be a substantial amount of money. Well, part of the exercise as you explore the RIA model is there's a lot of variables to compare, right? From whatever you have now to the RIA model. And I often talk about in these episodes, the economics, flexibility, all those sorts of things. And so on the economic front, typically, particularly if you're at that W-2 environment now, the economics are generally far better than what you have now at your firm. And so part of the exercise is one, to understand how those economics work. I talk about that in a lot of these episodes. Happy to talk directly one-on-one with you about it and how it looks for your particular situation. But the idea is you want to run that math and you want to say, okay, hey, if I were to make that move to the RIA model, what would my future economics be? And how does that compare to what I have now? And you would want to do that regardless if you have deferred comp. But there's usually that delta, right? And then for some of you, it could be a very meaningful delta of what you're achieving at a wirehouse and what you could achieve in an RIA model. And so you want to look at, okay, well, what is that? What's a realistic expectation of transition and all this stuff? And realistically, how much will my income go up? And then over the balance of my career, you got to factor all those in. And so you want to take that additional income and basically say, okay, what is the break-even point back to me losing deferred comp? So just using very simple math, let's say you have $600,000 in deferred comp built up. And again, it's this never-ending treadmill. You can't get off of it. And you're like, gosh, if I leave, I lose $600,000. Well, if in your new path, and the RIA model, again, this is just simple numbers, let's say you will make an extra $200,000 income per year over what your wirehouse model is. Now, devil's in the details. There's additional responsibilities you're going to have, blah, 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 beyond the scope of this episode. But the idea being, let's say it's $200,000. So right, that's just a simple math exercise. Okay, it will take me 3 years to break even from, okay, yes, I will lose the $600,000, but based on these calculations, it'll take me 3 years to get back to level from the additional income will offset all the income I lost. But then over the balance of my career, I will still be making that extra $200,000, and over time, in theory, it will continue to grow as your practice grows. And I equate that, it's no longer as good of an analogy because of where interest rates are, but with refinancing a mortgage. So back in the day when interest rates were lower and you might refinance a mortgage and there's closing costs, you would do this calculation, right? You'd say, okay, well, how much am I going to save in interest every year after I refinance this mortgage to a lower interest rate? But then what are my closing costs? And then how long is it going to take me in annual saved interest to recoup that closing cost? And if you're going to sell your house within maybe 1 year or 2 years, you might not reach that break-even point. But if you're going to be in the house for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it's worth kind of digging a little hole for those 2 years, digging back out of that hole, and then you're better off for the balance of your time. Same thing with while you're at a firm. Well, you might have to essentially dig a little hole, and then that new income digs you out of it. But unless you're within that 1, 2, 3 years of retirement, and you still have 5, 10, 15, 20 years in your career, it's worth taking one step back to go 2 steps, 3 steps forward kind of thing. So keep that in mind. Calculate your break-even point. Play the long game. Do the math on the long term. The next tip, and I want to say this lightly because I don't want to get hopes up, but if you were to join an RIA, I've done several episodes on why you might start an RIA versus join an RIA. There are some scenarios where joining an RIA that there could be some upfront transition assistance involved that they would pay you. The reason I say I want to say it lightly is one, not all RIAs pay it. And two, the ones that do, we are talking much more modest figures than if you were just to go to another wirehouse. Now, the reason for that is because the economics for you are so much better in the RIA model. So literally, the reason a wirehouse can give you this enormous check up front is because they are going to take an enormous amount of your payout for 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years going forward. That's not how it works in the RIA space. So the economics simply don't allow them to pay you a big amount up front because they're giving you better economics the whole time going forward. But some do pay a modest amount. Again, I just want to acknowledge that it's out there, but it's not going to massively move the needle for you. But that could help contribute towards some of what you might be losing when you leave your current firm. The next thing to keep in mind is, again, I just mentioned playing the long game. So not only do you want to think about the break-even point, not only do you want to think about your income annually going forward, but also at the end of your career, you want to get the value out of this book, this practice that you've built for years, if not decades. And as I've talked about in other episodes, the enterprise value of a practice in the RIA model is almost always better than it would be, or that you could get for your practice in that W-2 wirehouse type world. Oftentimes significantly better, not only in the value that would be placed on your practice in the marketplace, but also, and often overlooked, is how that money is taxed, and it's usually significantly more advantageous in the RIA model. So you need to think about, okay, if I don't get off the deferred comp treadmill because I don't want to lose this money, again, that you could potentially recoup in just a relatively short period of time. You don't want to lose it. Well, the reason they have that deferred comp is to keep you there to the end, and then they usually require that you go through their so-called sunset plan or their retirement plan for your practice. And you have to say, okay, if I stay on that treadmill and then go through that, well, what happens if I were to go to the RIA model, maybe take a step back for 1, 2, 3 years, recoup that money, get higher income over the balance, and then at the end, possibly, I don't want to oversell it, but possibly get a meaningfully better valuation and after-tax, essentially, funds to your pocket in that RIA model. You have to consider that as well. And for some of you, that's a long ways off, and so that seems, it's painful to lose that $600,000 deferred comp today, but you might well more than make it up just on the enterprise valuation and taxation at the end of the day when you get out at the end of your career. So again, play the long game, not just income, also the end valuation of your practice and how you will essentially cash out of that. Next, just in the RIA model, just beware, unless you are selling your practice to an RIA or going into an RIA model that is W-2, and there's generally not as many of those, or at least ones that don't require that you sell your practice. But if you go into a more traditional 1099 model, that's what most of my audiences aspire to. They want to be a business owner, own their own practice. In those cases, deferred comp is not a thing. I don't recall ever coming across an RIA that was like a 1099 model that did any sort of this deferred comp nonsense. Again, if you sell your practice to a firm and they want to incentivize you to stay around, who knows how they structure that. But as far as you retain ownership or just being in a more independent path, and again, if you choose to join an RIA, I don't recall ever coming across one that has deferred comp. It's likely there's something out there that does that, but just know this is not the norm. So if you get yourself off the treadmill once, there's not another treadmill generally waiting for you on the RIA side of things. The final kind of two tips on this just to think about is work to understand now what your deferred comp situation is. So the reason I say that is perhaps today you're not ready to begin exploring an RIA path, but maybe you want to or need to at some point. And when that time comes, there's going to be a lot of things you're working through. And of course, this all needs to be done. This is just how the industry operates. It's nothing shady. On the down low, confidentially as you're working through these steps. And there's going to be a lot of variables that you're going to need to keep your mind around and work through. You don't, if you can avoid this, you don't want to be waiting until, the eighth inning of that process to realize, oh, wow, I don't even know exactly how my deferred comp is right now or what vests when or what the situation would be. Figure that out now, and there's no other red flags that someone could question whether you're exploring something else or looking at something else. Go and figure it out and make sure you understand it. Make sure you know where to get that information. Make sure you know, again, what your situation would be if you left 3 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever your maybe rough target timeline is. How would that look? How would that play out? Take the time now, particularly if you haven't even begun exploring the RIA model, to figure all that out and get a head start on it. And then before I leave you with just one final takeaway, but The last tip is a lot of this is just that mental exercise. A lot of advisors or teams I hear they talk about they don't want to quote unquote lose their deferred comp. And I get where that's frustrating because it's your money. You earned it. For some of you, this is a substantial amount of money. And just to use my example from earlier, there's nothing enjoyable about seemingly losing $600,000, particularly of your own money that you've already earned. But you just have to mentally think long term, like I talked about, and do the math and say, okay, they don't deserve to keep my $600,000. This sucks that I lose the $600,000. But if I'm going to be better off long term over the balance of my career, I can't let that mental thing hold me back. And it does for a lot of folks. There's a lot of advisors teams that, and this is again why the firms put these in place, is they will keep you on that treadmill and they just can't overcome that mental part of it. Even though the math says long term, let's map it out. You will be better off. You will make that money up. Again, I don't want to blanket statement. Every advisor, every team's situation is unique, different. We got to go through that one-on-one and look at what your situation would be. But for most advisors, again, if you got enough time left in your career, that math is going to work out better for you. You do have to put pencil to paper and confirm all that and figure that out. But there's a lot of advisors teams that either they don't even want to do that math because they know they still won't be able to mentally get themselves off the treadmill. And if that's the case, then focus, stay on your treadmill. But once you do that math and you realize how it might look for you, it becomes increasingly easier to get off the treadmill, but you still mentally have to accept the fact you're quote unquote losing perhaps that amount of money. So try to overcome that mental hurdle. And then the final just takeaway, which circles back to the kind of the rant and I was doing at the top, is there's a geopolitical analogy that's often used or pointed out about how countries are governed, and you'll see how this applies to what we're talking about here. And there's kind of two kinds of countries out there in the world, and well, all countries need to protect their borders. If you're a sovereign country, you need to protect your border. It can't just be a free-flowing kind of thing. Well, there's two kinds of countries out there of how they approach this, and we'll use them as a hot political topic, but a proverbial wall, whether it's a physical wall or some other means. But the idea being that one set of countries in the world builds a wall to protect their people from outsiders that trying to come in that country doesn't want to come in. So that wall is to protect their people and keep essentially the bad people out, right? That is the case with most countries. However, there are countries that build walls to keep their citizens in the country. And you typically see this with communist countries, that it's like, well, why do you have this fortified border and you won't let your people leave? Well, which country would you rather live in? A country that believes in let's keep the bad folks out and just protect the people who are here, or the ones that are building a wall to keep you in? And so you have to ask yourself, and I know it's a harsh analogy to compare wirehouse firms to communist countries, but why, if wirehouse firms or W-2 firms or whoever's doing this deferred comp stuff, if they are providing you as the advisor with such good value and value for your clients, and that they are, as they would point out, the best option for you and your clients out there available, why do they have to put up a wall, in the case of deferred comp, to keep you from leaving? Shouldn't just the value prop and the satisfaction they provide for their advisors be enough to keep you happy? And wouldn't they provide a much better experience for you if that was their mentality? If they said, well, we don't need to build walls to arbitrarily do this. Let's just do everything we can to keep our advisors happy and to reinvest in the platform and keep their clients happy with the experience as well. Wouldn't that be a more effective way to govern? And that it seems crazy, but that's not how it's entirely done. They are building these walls to keep you in. So just think about that. Why does your firm have to arbitrarily build a wall to keep you in via deferred comp when there are solutions out there that don't do that? So just a little takeaway for you. So like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA. This is the type of thing I help advisors with all day long, is to look at what's your current situation. How does the RA model work? How does it look for your practice? What might a transition process kind of look like? And then get into these details. Okay, you do have deferred comp. Okay, let's talk about that. How would that look? How would it look if you made the move? and working through all of those variables is part of this process. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. But as a starting point, head on over to transitiontoria.com, where you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, and at the top of every page is a contact link. You can click on that and instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.